I am nervous, I'll be honest. Right, so this is just an update of where I've got to with the Wonder Wagon, my VW T4 2.5 TDI transporter. The last time I moved the van, I positioned it on these ramps and then wasn't able to start it again. And what I discovered when I took the engine tray off was that the likely cause, well, what I assumed was the likely cause of my intermittent idle stalling issue was the fact that coolant and oil had got into the various plugs on the front of the engine and into the wiring loom, and must have been contributing to the fault that was throwing up in VCDS, which related to the quantity adjuster. Now, I've been down this road before and it was a very expensive thing. Anyway, I figured that what I would do is begin replacing and resealing all of the different components on the engine, at least all of those that I could get to reasonably without having to take the engine out. So this is an update of what I've done so far. I will release a video about each of these parts and components that I've removed and resealed, where I've fitted new O-rings or new gaskets, so that others who want to do this can learn from the mistakes that I made and also the challenges that I faced. Some of these seals and gaskets were pretty straightforward to replace and others were not. Let me explain what I've done so far. I put the car up on ramps, removed the engine tray, removed the conduit from the wiring loom when I discovered that it was covered in oil. I unplugged the engine loom from the various sensors and bits and pieces, removed the oil filler tube and the air oil separator, removed my intercooler setup, set the engine at top dead center, removed the temperature sensor cooling housing, removed the thermostat housing and the thermostat, removed the radiator, air conditioning condenser, and drained the whole system of coolant. I then decided that I was going to replace the water pump, which then led to replacing the gasket on the oil pump, which I found that was leaking. I also fixed the leak on the power steering pump, replaced the gaskets on oil filter cooler, tried unsuccessfully to replace the gasket on the oil filter bracket, which I just could not get loose, and on closer inspection figured that it wasn't leaking anyway, so I left it. I also looked at replacing the gasket for the oil dipstick, which didn't look like it was leaking, but once again, for fear of stripping the bolt because it just would not loosen, decided to forego that one as well. During this whole process of removing the oil pump to replace the oil pump gasket, what I didn't realize was that the oil pickup pipe was screwed into the bottom of the oil pump, and even though I had released the oil pump, I couldn't remove it because of course the oil pickup pipe was in place, and getting a little bit frustrated and heavy-handed with the situation led to me putting a small crack in the oil sump, which meant that I had to have that repaired, and in order to get that repaired it meant that I had to remove it. Now, I'd been told and I'd read that you could remove the oil pan quite simply by removing all of the bolts, one or two of which are quite difficult to get to behind the gearbox intermediary shaft, or what's known as the trumpet. I discovered that it just was not possible for me to get to those bolts without removing the drive shaft and the intermediary shaft. Additionally, what I didn't realize at that point, because I'd already removed the belts from the side of the engine, the timing belt between the crankshaft and the camshaft on the water pump side, was that in order to remove the sump, you need to be able to rotate the flywheel, in other words, rotate the crank, so that you can expose an opening in the flywheel to get to two additional bolts that are holding on the oil sump, which meant that I had to reassemble everything just to rotate the flywheel to remove the two bolts and then pull the timing belt, the water pump and the oil pump out once I'd finally got the sump off. It really was quite a convoluted affair, and you'll probably find the video about that very interesting. Nevertheless, I had to remove that in order to get the sump off, so it really was a torrid affair, and the video will probably make some of you cringe and some of you laugh, but yeah, it's pretty helpful. To get the sump off, you'd think that you could just undo a bunch of bolts and drop it off, but no, you can't. Well, I couldn't, and there was just no way around it. With the sump removed, I could then remove the oil pump and remove the oil pickup pipe. I replaced the gaskets for those, reattached the sump with the new gasket and also with VW sealant. Then had to replace the trumpet and the drive shafts, and then I could get to the point of putting the timing belt back on once I'd got the new water pump in. And what you'll see from the video is that my vibration damper pulley is fused to my crankshaft pulley. The two are not separate. I don't know if that's a special model or if that's just happened over the time. I'm not sure what the situation is. But it did mean that putting the whole thing back together again was a little bit more challenging than if they were two separate pieces. With that all done and the lower parts of the engine resealed, I removed the rocker cover, replaced the rocker cover gasket. I then decided to remove the air intake because that was very badly sooted up with carbon and all the rest of it. So I stripped that off, which is a story in itself, and cleaned that out successfully, reinstalled it, and then refitted my intercooler, reattached all the wiring, and this is what happened next. I'm now going to start the engine up for the first time after having done all of the resealing work that you've been watching me do. I suppose all I have to do is turn the key, see what happens. Everything is connected, alternator earth is in place, fixed that problem with the oil pressure sensor, topped up the fluids, turn the key. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Keys in the ignition, foot's on the clutch, ignition is on. The little flashing oil light was because I replaced the bonnet switch. That's gone off now. Let's see what happens. That's not promising. Spoiler alert. My van likes to eat ECUs. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative. Give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you a thing, and of course it's a great encouragement to me. So let's fix this.